HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Opposite of Hate, a field guide to repairing our humanity by Sally Kohn. Read by Sally Kohn. To Sarah and Willa, my reasons for everything. Introduction. What is hate? The bully. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. Nelson Mandela. I guess what I did to Vicky Rush isn't really that bad, but it still haunts me. People seem to think I'm a nice person. In fact, a lot of people know me as a nice person in my public life for being able to get along with even the people I vehemently disagree with. As a liberal commentator on Fox News for 2 years and now on CNN, I developed a reputation as a fierce progressive who is able to talk respectfully with conservatives, including extreme ones. I even gave a TED Talk about how people with the most diametrically opposed views can practice what I call emotional correctness, holding ourselves accountable for talking to each other with respect and finding empathy for one another, no matter how strongly we disagree. Emotional correctness is about communicating compassion and mutual respect, not only with our words, but with our intent and tone. I'm still an ardent fan, but I've been finding it increasingly difficult to practice, catching myself slipping into anger and swimming in hate, especially in the last few years. I was sort of trained to hate. Before I became a television commentator, I worked for 15 years as a community organizer, fighting for policy reform on issues like lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT rights, healthcare, criminal justice, and immigration. Right-wingers were my enemies, and I hated them. The father of community organizing, Saul Alinsky, called his political enemies devils, and defined the goal of organizing as attacking one's enemies, not just institutionally, but personally, because personal attacks hurt more. Good organizers must rub raw the sores of discontent, Alinsky said. That's what I was taught it meant to be a good organizer, and I considered myself a good organizer. And the truth is, I still have friends on the left as well as on the right who think that hate is one of the most useful tools in their civic engagement tool belt. But when I became a commentator, I realized that I could have more influence if people would actually listen to me, which, practically speaking, they weren't going to do if they thought I hated them. Also, it turns out I prefer being liked. And if you want to be likable, it helps to like others. But Donald Trump's election to the presidency of the United States of America made my blood boil. I couldn't believe the level of hate he so readily and proudly spewed against Muslims and women and immigrants and African Americans. I remember feeling dumbfounded when George W. Bush was reelected in 2004. There was a map that my friends and I all shared over email that showed the United States carved up into blue parts and red parts, with the red parts labeled Dumb Fuckistan. I may not have consciously categorized Bush voters as less than human, but I certainly thought they were less than American, and certainly less than me, less smart, less understanding, and, ironically enough, less compassionate. I didn't think any of that was particularly hateful. I just thought I was correct. But this was worse. I truly couldn't fathom that anywhere near a majority of my fellow Americans had voted for Donald Trump. And as much as I tried to pretend to be magnanimous and uniting, I hated them for it. Suddenly, all the partisan nastiness I'd tried to suppress or even solve as a talking head came rushing back to me with even more vengeance. Instead of being a prominent critic of incivility, I felt like I was auditioning to be the poster child for partisan hate. And though I knew this wasn't the first hateful moment in U.S. history, or even the worst, it felt like the crisis that was bubbling up in me was also bubbling up throughout the United States and around the globe, in politics and pop culture, in sporting matches and mass shootings. As I would catch myself in these little moments of hateful hypocrisy, whether I was just noticing them more or they were getting worse, the more I thought about Vicky. I kept asking myself if I could backslide into such anger so readily. Was I really just a hateful person? Was all this stuff about niceness and emotional correctness an attempt to mask my true nature? Was it inevitable that the spreading crisis of hate would engulf not only me, but all of us? I should probably tell you what I did to Vicky. I'm 10 years old, and in the middle of the school day, I'm in the hallway outside the 5th grade classrooms all by myself. The classroom doors are all closed, students burbling behind them. The bell is about to ring, and soon the hall will thunder with kids. But right now it's just me, standing in the quiet corridor with its ugly, army green-tiled walls and those floors that screech when you drag your sneakers just so, waiting with a pen in one hand and a clipboard in the other. I don't remember how I managed to get out of class. Maybe I asked to go to the bathroom. I must have seen Vicky go and followed her, because I had a plan. Using the Apple IIe my mom had at home, I hunted and pecked out a survey about shampoo preferences. At the top it asked, "What kind of shampoo do you use?" and then offered a list of possible responses with a place next to each for a tick mark tally. I had printed it out and carefully folded and torn off the edges of the dot matrix paper so that it would look as official as possible when I approached Vicky. Everyone called her Sticky Vicky. Looking back, I know her life must have been difficult. She clearly didn't bathe very often. Maybe she had no one loving or capable enough at home to make sure she took care of herself. I didn't think about that then. I just knew that Sticky Vicky smelled, which was only one of the ways that Sticky Vicky was different. She also gave herself nosebleeds all the time, and sometimes when the teachers called on her, she would make a honking noise, like a goose, and crawl under her desk. She didn't have any friends except for the kids who one of the teachers assigned to be friends with her, out of pity. All this now makes me feel terribly heartbroken for Vicky, for whatever her life was like then, for whatever she was going through at home or in her mind. But still, there I am, in the hallway with my pen and my clipboard, holding my pen like a precise and official-looking person, like I was conducting some kind of study for science class. Sticky Vicky comes out of the bathroom, and I ask her what shampoo she uses. White Rain. She says White Rain shampoo. I can't remember the name of any of my 5th grade teachers, a single book I read that year, or any year in elementary school, what I liked to eat back then, what movies I watched, or what street my best friend lived on, but I remember that Vicky Rarsh told me she used White Rain shampoo like she just said it 10 seconds ago. As I get Vicky's answer, the bell rings, and the hallway fills up with students. I run down the hall, shouting, "Sticky Vicky uses White Rain shampoo! Sticky Vicky uses White Rain shampoo! Don't use White Rain shampoo, or you'll smell like Sticky Vicky." All the kids laugh, and some point at her. That's where my memory, thankfully, ends. I had buried this memory and hadn't thought of Vicky for decades. But when I started getting this reputation for being nice, I kept finding the scene flitting back into my mind, as though my conscience were taunting me. I realized I needed to find Vicky. I needed to find out what happened to her, to find out how her life had turned out, and I wanted to make amends. I'd moved to a different school the year after I pulled my stunt on her, but I still had a few friends from those days. I called them to ask what they knew about her, and they told me that Vicky had changed schools the same year I did. Nobody knew where she went. I tried searching for her through Google, but nothing at all came up. After months of looking without any luck, I hired a private investigator. Even as I called him, I wondered if I wasn't maybe getting just a little oddly carried away with my determination to find Vicky. Then I realized I didn't just want to find out what happened to her. I also wanted to find out what happened to me. Was I really a nice person after all? Because what kind of nice person would do something like that? I wanted to understand not only my own hate, but the hate that seemed to be engulfing the planet. So I set out to do just that. The bad news is we all hate. All of us. That includes me, and I'm afraid it also includes you. I promise that although this is a book about hate, it will end on an uplifting and positive note. But first, we have to face the hard truth. In different ways and to different degrees, consciously or unconsciously, all of us, in one way or another, sometimes treat other individuals and entire groups of human beings as though they are fundamentally less deserving than we are. We're only a few pages in, and you might already be bristling at that point. How dare I suggest that you hate? And I am, for the record, doing just that. But let's be clear that I am deliberately using a broad definition of hate, one that's consistent with the definition used by many experts in the field. So while I don't mean the sort of tedious hate as in, I hate broccoli, or I hate the music of Kenny G, or even I hate my math teacher, I would include pretty much everything else, from partisan incivility to overt sexism to implicit racial bias to any other tendency to discriminate against, dehumanize, or demean someone because of some aspect of who they are or the group to which they belong. Building on the theories of Harvard University psychologist Gordon Alpert, who pioneered human personality research and wrote the influential book The Nature of Prejudice, the Anti-Defamation League argues that different kinds and severities of hate build on one another. The organization classifies 5 overall categories in its pyramid of hate. At the base of the pyramid are things like stereotyping, the use of exclusionary language, and the belief in the inherent superiority of some groups and the inferiority of others. The next level includes individual acts of prejudice like bullying, name-calling, and unspoken but harmful acts of social avoidance, like the way I and other kids in 5th grade moved to the other side of the hallway when Sticky Vicky walked by. Then there are institutional forms of discrimination, whether in employment or housing policy or the political system, the kind of hate baked into our institutions and our norms, and actually encouraged by them and taught to generation after generation. One step further is bias-motivated violence such as terrorism or hate crimes, and at the top comes genocide. I wanted to explore the whole pyramid, from online trolling against Jews and Muslims to hyper-partisan nastiness between Democrats and Republicans, from rudeness in the public sphere to racially biased legislation, from slaughtering people because of their ethnicity to bullying. And if you're wondering what on earth my bullying of Vicky has to do with hate, it wasn't an accident that I was a rich kid picking on a poor kid, or that Vicky, it turns out, would eventually end up being gay. Poor kids and LGBT kids are statistically more likely to be bullied. There was plenty else going on in my little 10-year-old mind, and I'm not suggesting hate was the only reason I picked on Vicky, or even that I was consciously hateful, but still, the same groups of people we discriminate against in our society, as a whole, are also the groups most likely to be picked on in school. That's not just a coincidence. That's hate. In fact, it's not only inaccurate, but dangerous to reserve the term hate only for conscious and extreme forms of cruelty. What I've learned is that different forms and degrees of hate all stem from the same societal and psychological phenomena, which divide communities against each other and dehumanize groups of others, creating a climate in which further hate becomes more likely and even, potentially, deadly. We are all potential dehumanizers, just as we are all potential objects of dehumanization, writes philosopher David Livingstone Smith. I wanted to understand not only how these different kinds and degrees of hate are related, but how we can stop small hates from growing out of control. The United States was founded on hate. The hatred that justified colonial annihilation of American Indians and that perpetuated the enslavement of Africans. Hate divided the country during the Civil War, and a century later spawned protest movements and backlash movements, with activists vying over issues of justice and human rights. And Americans are not alone in this legacy. Obviously, our globe's history of colonial conquest and brutality, and the many current hotspots of extreme violence and displacement, reflect deep currents of hate. It would be naive to argue we're in the most hateful moment in history. But relativity on this topic is cold comfort. The hate that's brewing now is harmful, frightening, and increasingly acute. It doesn't have to be the worst moment in history for it to be bad enough to warrant a concerted effort at reckoning and change. In the 25 years the Pew Research Center has surveyed Republicans and Democrats about how they view the other party, the majority of respondents in both parties answered very unfavorable for the first time in 2016. More than half of Democrats, 55%, say the Republican Party makes them afraid, while 49% of Republicans say the same about the Democratic Party, the poll found. And just under half of the members of both parties say that the other party makes them feel angry. We talk about politics and political engagement in aggressive, apocalyptic terms. Republicans are launching a war on women. Democrats are launching a war on Christmas. Immigrants are invading. During the 2016 election, Donald Trump and his supporters repeatedly chanted, "Lock her up," regarding Hillary Clinton. And at one rally I attended, a Trump supporter shouted, "Hang her in the streets." Our problem with hate is not only a matter of speech or sentiment. Since the 2016 election, the United States has seen a rise in attacks on Muslims and immigrants and Jewish communities. Hate crimes in the U.S. increased by 20% in 2016, fueled in part by the contentious election. In the first 3 months of 2017 alone, anti-Semitic incidents rose by 86%. In January 2017, swastikas were drawn on 3 synagogues in the town of Clearwater, Florida. In June 2017, a teenage Muslim girl wearing a hijab and an abaya was murdered with a baseball bat, then dumped in a pond. Later, a memorial to the girl was burned. In February 2017, 4 black teenagers were charged with hate crimes after they kidnapped a white teenager with a mental disability and broadcast a live stream on Facebook Live as they beat the man and yelled, "Fuck white people." White supremacists rebranded as the alt-right have become more visible and emboldened, not to mention empowered, including high-level alt-righters given posts in the Trump White House. Hate is also coming from the other side of the political spectrum. As I was writing this book in June 2017, an avowed liberal who had volunteered for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign opened fire on Republican members of Congress practicing for an annual bipartisan baseball game. He allegedly wanted to kill conservatives. When a wildfire destroyed 1,000 homes in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, in November 2016, killing 14 people and injuring 200 others, one Trump opponent tweeted, "Laughing at all the Trump supporters in Gatlinburg as their homes burn to the ground tonight. Too bad it's not the whole state burning." And another tweeted, "Maybe it's God punishing them for voting for Trump." We've gotten to the point where hate is such an acceptable norm that we not only believe it's inevitable, but we try to overtly market its benefits and exploit hate for profit. There's now a dating app called Hater, which will match you with a potential love interest based on the things or people you mutually hate. Really. If you hate the saxophone stylings of Kenny G, we might be a match. Meanwhile, much of the media relies on making animosity not only palatable but virtually addictive. More and more of us get our news primarily, if not exclusively, from television channels and websites that cater to our hate and present information in ways that reinforce our biases. This not only exploits hate, but exacerbates it. All across the media, ratings aren't going up because viewers are getting more informed, but because they're getting more inflamed. I know I get more clicks and claps every time I roll my eyes on air, whether I mean to or not, and whether you think that's the meanest thing in the world or not. I'm not going to argue about which side or group does it worse. We all hate, and we all do it too much. So what do we do now? Is hate an inevitable part of human nature, so deeply rooted that none of us can ever be immune? How can people be so mean to complete strangers? What kind of person calls someone they don't even know a cunt or a nasty-ass lesbo on Twitter? Do they really mean it? And can people who've lived lives of deep hatred, like white supremacist skinheads and terrorists, change? And even if we can combat hate one hater at a time, incrementally in each of our own lives, can we ever overcome hate in our society as a whole? How does hate become systematized and institutionalized so that our governmental policies and communities and culture not only provide cover for hate, but worse, promulgate it? And what's the solution? Sure, we can blame Donald Trump for bringing open hatred once again into the top ranks of visible political power. But hate has been coursing through the veins of our society since English colonizers set foot on North America's shores, and it has been aided and abetted by elected leaders and judges and bankers and textbooks and TV shows. I want to understand how hate infects our entire society, and I want to know how we can fight back. A year ago, when my daughter Willa was 7 years old, she told me about a joke she'd played on a kid at school. Willa and 3 of her little friends had agreed the next day they would all wear pants to school. She told me they'd formed a club, the Pants Club, in which they were the members, and all the other kids weren't. But then, behind one girl's back, Willa convinced the other 2 to pull a prank on her. Willa and those 2 girls actually showed up the next day in dresses, deliberately making the 3rd girl feel left out. Now, this wasn't the meanest prank in the world, just like there are kids who commit worse transgressions than mouthy shampoo surveys. But the similarities socked me in the gut. Willa had plotted to mock and marginalize another child. Was I setting a bad example without even realizing it, my supposedly reined-in hatred somehow seeping out? Then I started to see it all around me. During the summer before the 2016 election, my street in the leafy liberal neighborhood of Park Slope in Brooklyn, New York, held its annual block party. And as always, there was a piñata. And this year, the guy who always organizes the block party got a piñata of Donald Trump's head. I was furious. I'd been spending months trying to teach my daughter not to hate Trump in spite of all the vitriol she was picking up in slips of the tongue at home, at school, and in the media. And now here was my neighbor literally stringing up Trump's head so little kids could whack at it. I conveyed my strong disappointment to the block party organizer in the form of a few choice curse words. Yes, the irony. Thankfully, other neighbors expressed their irritation too, but no one wanted to forego the ritual, and so up the head went. I told my daughter she wouldn't be able to participate. But Mom, it's just a piñata, Willa protested. It's not his real head. Yeah, but it's still not okay, I said. Willa was listening, and I could see I was making her think, but I could also see a tantrum brewing. Duh, of course there was. There was candy in that piñata, and my daughter loves an opportunity to hit anything with a stick. She pleaded, and wanting deeply to avoid a complete meltdown, I selfishly relented. Okay, I groaned, but can you imagine that you're not actually hitting Trump and instead pretending you're hitting the views he stands for? Willa agreed, and I let her take her turn as other little kids stood around gleefully cheering. Then we all got a nice candy reward. Too often, we begrudgingly accept hate, or even cheer it on. Too often, we don't see the hate around us. Too often, we don't see it in ourselves. Too often, people in our communities and around the world are beaten down by hate that we consciously or unconsciously spread. But it's hate we should be beating. The prize for doing so is a sweeter future for all of us. Chapter 1. Why We Hate the Trolls. I would permit no man to narrow and degrade my soul by making me hate him. Booker T. Washington. The hate that I most personally encounter on a daily basis comes from the mean people on the internet known as trolls. So when I decided to explore the conditions and contortions that fuel hate, my trolls were a natural first place for me to start. I've always wondered how the hell complete strangers can berate and belittle me on a daily basis. And, honestly, what the hell is wrong with these people? Also, the more hate mail and hate tweets I got, the more I started to worry that it was normal. That it's just human nature to be mean and to even enjoy it, especially if you can do it hiding behind an anonymous online avatar. And I was the weirdo for thinking everyone should be nice. Admittedly, it was a fair amount of perverse curiosity that got me calling my trolls on the phone in the first place. But by the time I hung up, I'd learned more about myself. It had never dawned on me that my trolls thought I was the mean one. It had also never dawned on me that they might be nice. In my early days at Fox News, I experienced emotional whiplash. On the one hand, I was surprised, even shocked, to find that people I'd thought of as the very definition of hate, people like conservative talk show host Sean Hannity, in real life didn't have horns and fangs, but were actually pretty nice. Certainly way nicer than I'd expected. On the other hand, for the first time in my life, I started getting hate mail, which shocked me in a whole other way. Admittedly, I'd walked into Fox News with a pretty low regard for conservatives in general, but even so, my trolls shocked me. I was amazed by the constant torrent of hostility directed at me by viewers, both over email and on Twitter. I tried to reassure myself that most people, indeed, even most Fox News viewers, didn't send hate mail, but still, a staggering number of people did. And they were so incredibly mean, sometimes even threatening violence. I felt devastated and depressed. I don't mean to suggest I took it personally. I know this stuff comes with the territory of being a public voice, and I was grateful to be getting well known enough to be attacked. Plus, I didn't actually think I was a moronic libtard or stupid bitch. But it was the fact that people were sending it that disturbed me. Who even does that? And what kind of sick society produces people who do that? I'm not a big drinker, but there were a few months there I was drinking way more than usual, and definitely way more than I should have been. During this time, I had a meeting with one of the network executives. He asked how I was doing and wanted to know how everyone was treating me. He was particularly curious to know if I was getting any pushback or attacks from the left for being on Fox. I told him no, not a one. In fact, as a side note, I was never attacked from the left for being on Fox News, at least not that I heard about. But I was getting a lot of hate mail from the right, I told him. A lot. I confessed it was shaking my faith in humanity. "Oh, you're not reading that crap, are you?" he blurted out. "Don't! Those people are crazy lowlifes, and I ought to know because they're our viewers." He smiled broadly at me, like calling his own audience lowlifes was a point of pride. "I shouldn't be worried for humanity," he said, because the people who were sending me hate mail were barely human. He suggested I skim any messages containing genuine threats, like the time someone tweeted, "Sally Kohn looks like a good place for a bullet to me." I was supposed to send those ones to network security so they could investigate and notify local authorities if necessary. I still have to do this with disturbing regularity, even now that I work at CNN. The rest he said to stick in a folder and forget about. But I couldn't forget. And it didn't help to think of my trolls as crazy or less than human. I didn't want to give them too much power, but it also felt wrong to just stereotype them as fringe lunatics or deny their basic humanity. I've toughened up a whole lot since then, but honestly, my trolls still get in my head. It's not only that their messages can be so horrifically hostile, like, Sally Kohn, stupid, you should have been aborted, you fucking commie, and next to the radical Islamic extremist who murdered 49 human lives on Saturday, you are truly one of the most hate-filled individuals I know of in this country. How can someone who objects to me supposedly being so hate-filled write those words without, apparently, seeing the irony of how hate-filled that message is? Also, really? I'm as bad as ISIS? Other trolls have tweeted that one at me too, even before the hateful alt-right smear that CNN is ISIS. The fact is, I can post the most benign, apolitical thing in the universe, and I still get trolled. During the 2016 elections, I posted a picture of my dog in the park, and pro-Trump trolls filled my Instagram feed with hashtag MAGA, as in Make America Great Again. Trolling my dog? To be fair, one person did post hashtag MAGA, but your dog is cute. And yes, my golden mountain doodle Sadie Pig is about as adorable as she sounds, but that's not my point. I don't want to brag, but someone from Twitter once told me that I have some of the worst trolls on the platform. Okay, I am bragging, and I know that's a weird thing to brag about, but in my less horrified moments, I can see it as some indication that people who don't agree with me are at least paying attention, which I guess is constructive. Still, I've had people ask me to never retweet them again, because my trolls are just too intense. Trolling really is hateful, and it often hurts, sometimes a lot. Trolling also very clearly hurts our society. Trolling was once only a creepy fringe phenomenon affecting the corners of the interwebs, but in 2016, the United States elected a Twitter troll as president. Suddenly, we all had a trolling problem. Then, more and more people were feeling empowered to spew hate, and the subjects of that hate were firing back with their own. As if overnight, trolling had not only entered the lexicon of mainstream society, but our bloodstream too, infecting every aspect of our lives, online and off, and threatening the entire prospect of a civil and democratic society. In reaching out to see if I could convince some of my trolls to talk to me, I focused on Twitter because, frankly, that's where most of them are. Twitter seems to be the most alluring modern platform for hateful expression. Sure, there's a fair amount of hate spilled on Facebook and Instagram, and there are entire sites like 4chan and parts of Reddit basically devoted to hate, but most of my daily interaction with trolls is on Twitter. And they're not all bots, not even most of them from what I can tell. They're actually real human beings. So I wanted to know, what possesses human beings to spew such vile attacks? And does online trolling spill over into real-life hate? Do trolls believe the things they write? Do they think about the consequences? Or do they selfishly just want attention? Who are the people hiding behind their hashtags? And perhaps most importantly, given that the internet was supposed to be a neutral platform to bring humanity closer together, does the fact that it's now infested with trolls reveal something profound, not only about technology, but about our essential human nature? My plan was to contact my nastiest trolls. In the back of my head, I was optimistic that I'd have some transformative effect on them, like what happened when the author Lindy West wrote a blog post about how hurt she was by a troll who had impersonated her recently deceased father on Twitter in order to harass her. After reading her post, the troll emailed West in a confessional breakdown, admitting that he'd just been jealous of her self-esteem and thus was trying to destroy it. He vowed he would never troll again, and the two ended up talking on the phone for a heart-wrenching episode of the radio show This American Life. Yes, I thought, as I heard her account, that's how change will happen when we all start confronting hate with compassion rather than more hate. But my encounters with my trolls didn't quite go like that. I did end up with one offer for a date, I think, but mostly what I got from my conversations with my trolls was a deeper understanding of why perfectly sane people can be so bizarrely venomous. I have so many trolls that I had to find a way to narrow the field, so I had an analysis done of my top trolls on Twitter, courtesy of the very helpful and tech-savvy folks at a company called Spreadfast. They looked at my Twitter data for the 50 weeks prior to August 16, 2016. During that period, I had 158,000 replies on Twitter from 46,694 users. Many were from fans, but a distinct subset were from trolls, including a number of super trolls, some of whom tweeted at me on average more than once a day. I followed all of them and either tweeted at them or sent them messages asking them to follow me back so we could communicate. In all, I tried to contact more than a dozen trolls, including all of my worst offenders, and I heard back from about half. Some of them didn't want to talk. My apologies to you/whoever handles your Twitter, ma'am, since I have tweeted some dick things in your direction, B. Many Heart messaged me. Where is this magical intern who supposedly reads my social media feeds for me?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?